You're listening to the Journey Podcast. What transformations await when we prioritize both mental health and the equitable treatment of every employee? Stay tuned for today's episode. This episode contains adult subject matter, and some listeners may be triggered by this content. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Journey Podcast. Welcome to today's episode, which is part of a special series for the CMHA Mental Health Week in Canada. In this episode, we delve into the critical issue of workplace mental health and the quest for fairness in professional settings. We discuss the challenges individuals face when mental health struggles intersect with career demands, particularly how support, or the lack thereof, can profoundly impact our well-being and job security. This conversation opens up about the systemic changes needed to foster healthier work environments that prioritize employee mental health. Jan Wong is a third-generation Canadian who grew up in Montreal speaking English, some French, and zero Chinese. In the summer of 1972, while majoring in Asian Studies at McGill University, she traveled alone to the People's Republic of China. At 19, she talked her way into a spot at Peking University, becoming the first of two Westerners to study in China during the Cultural Revolution. Jan soon became fluent in Mandarin as a result of being the one and only student of a humorless Communist Party official, whom she nicknamed Fu the Enforcer. On Saturday afternoons, as part of Chairman Mao's Revolution in Education movement, Jan also dug ditches, hauled pig manure, and harvested wheat. Later, as a foreign correspondent based in Beijing for 6 years, Jan was an eyewitness to the 1989 massacre at Tiananmen Square. Jan began her journalism career in 1979 as the first ever news assistant to the New York Times bureau in Beijing. In 1981, after graduating with a master's degree from Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism, she became a staff reporter at the Gazette in Montreal and later the Boston Globe, the Wall Street Journal, and the Globe and Mail. She's a recipient of the George Polk Award in the U.S. for Business Reporting, a National Newspaper Award in Canada for Foreign Reporting, the New England Press Association Newswoman of the Year Award, the Globe and Mail's Stanley McDowell Prize for Writing, and the Lowell Thomas Travel Journalism Silver Medal, a National Magazine Silver Award in Canada for column writing, and the Daily Bread Food Bank Public Education Award in Toronto, among other honors. Let's meet Jan Wong. Hi, Jan. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I have really been looking forward to getting to chat with you because your experience in mental health, and especially mental health in the workplace, is absolutely incredible and will make for such an interesting topic today. So thank you for taking the time to support Mental Health Week, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Petra, for having me on.
It's my absolute pleasure. And would you like to start with telling us a little bit about yourself and your own journey so that our listeners can get an idea of who you are and what you have been through yourself?
I'm a Canadian born in Montreal, and I became a journalist and started as a business reporter. And then I had my dream come true of becoming a foreign correspondent in China and covered the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989. And then I returned to Toronto, where my newspaper is headquartered, the Globe and Mail. It's Canada's national newspaper. And I worked as a columnist and feature writer and kind of the person they would send out on a crisis story. So I was sent to cover university shooting, a college shooting in Montreal in 2006 at Dawson College. And I wrote the main piece for the weekend. And I wrote about Quebec politics, knowing it was sensitive. And my newspaper really liked it and they wanted more. And I said, well, I think this is enough. So I wrote it. And then I got attacked. It was before the days of Twitter, but it was during the days of email. And so I got flooded with hate emails because I had said that Quebec was a society that was quite hostile to non Anglophone, non Francophones. Like minorities were caught in the middle because three of the school shooters in Canada, all three at that point, at university school shooters, were all in Montreal and all three had been minorities. So I wrote this. And of course, I write controversial things all the time. So I got this huge backlash. And I asked my newspaper to stand up for me and protect me, and they wouldn't. It was very odd. And then my family's business in Montreal was attacked. My father owned several restaurants, and there was a boycott saying that Chinese were dirty, and we ate cats and dogs. And there were caricatures of me in the mainstream Quebec newspapers, which just proved my point. They were racist cartoons. It just proved my point of what kind of society Quebec was, and something I felt entitled to say as a Quebecer. So fine. So that happens to journalists all the time. And it was early on, and I think there was not much consciousness about the impact on reporters. There's more awareness today, but I had no protection from my newspaper and I asked for a little support. And instead, they opened the pages of the paper to columnists from Quebec to attack me and published, I forget how many letters to the editor. This is over one story. And in Parliament in Ottawa, I got denounced. And, I went on Quebec radio to say, people said, well, why are they doing this? And I said, well, you can't win a federal election in Canada without support from Quebec. It's just not statistically possible. So then my newspaper said, you can't talk, you can't talk. And that's the beginning of the gag order, which I'll talk about when it comes to mental health. So within a couple of weeks, I wasn't functioning. And I remember I didn't know what was happening to me, but I felt like I couldn't even, I think I got a death threat at work. I got excrement or blood sent to me. And the security guard was great at work. He said, okay, I'll take care of this. And I went down to the security office, and the head of security just said, we don't handle this. You have to do it. So what's going on? Only years later did I think I understood what happened. And that was we were owned partly by the phone company. The newspaper was partly owned by the phone company at that point, and the phone company was headquartered in Montreal. The board was headquartered. So I assume that's the only reason the newspaper acted so weirdly instead of protecting the reporter. I think the board in Montreal must have called the publisher in Toronto and said, get rid of her, which is not what you're supposed to do with a journalist who hasn't committed an error. So all of this is happening. I don't understand. I am now unable to make a phone call, a simple phone call. I don't know. I can't phone because I'm having a mental breakdown, but I don't understand it because I've never had this before. And I can't even call my doctor. And I remember I went to my doctor's office because I couldn't phone. Like I'm a journalist who can't make a phone call. I walk in and the reception says, so what is it about? And I just start to cry. And she says, okay, 7:00, which I didn't understand, but that's when they do therapy, after hours therapy. And to make a long story short, my family doctor said, you can't go to work. You need to rest. And it went on for a few months. And my newspaper was at first fine. But after a few months, the insurer, Manulife, said, you have to get back to work. And it's like, I can't get back to work because I can't make a phone call. and I can't remember what I'm doing, and I can't write notes, and I can't interview people, can't remember anything. I don't know what's wrong with me. And my doctor said, you really should see a psychiatrist. And I said, no, 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 no. I'm fine. I'm not mentally ill. I'm not weak. How could I be mentally ill? So I was full of ignorance. And in the end, Manulife made me see their psychiatrist, not to treat me, but to see if I was a liar. And that psychiatrist said, "You're not better yet, and you better go see a psychiatrist." And at that point, I went to see a psychiatrist, and he began to treat me. And then I slowly began to accept that I had severe clinical depression, that I needed medication. I started taking medication. The first types didn't work. It was very difficult. You have to start taking it, and then you have to see if it works. It doesn't work, so then you have to step it down. You cannot just stop it. And then, so it was a long, hard process. And then early on, the newspaper offered me a buyout, 2 years. And I didn't want to leave. I loved my job and I didn't feel I was really sick. So you have the patient going, "I'm not sick," and you have the employer going, "You're not sick." It's a very bad combination. And then after a while, the newspaper said, "Well, actually, we're going to fire you." And then it became negotiations over, "You're firing me? For what? What is the cause?" And so then I started to fight it. But I'm a union member. And in Canada, if you're a union member, you have no standing. That's a legal term for you don't exist. And only the union can negotiate. And the union, for the first few months, was just great. And then after that, they became even worse than my employer because they just wanted to get rid of me. They said, "What's wrong with you? They're offering you 2 years. You're lucky. Just take it and go." So I completely was unsupported and no one would let me talk. The newspaper would not let me talk. And the union said, "No." I said, "Can you tell my colleagues what's wrong with me?" Everyone thought I was on another book leave because I've written several books. And I said, "Can you just tell them I'm sick and what's happening?" And Manulife and the Globe cut off my sick pay. So I had no income. I had no money, which of course makes you even worse. And then finally, I realized I need to write about this because I was so shocked at what was happening to my mind. I was fascinated by how the doctor was treating me, that the treatment for depression is to go and do things you like. But that Manulife, if you do things you like, they will take this as proof that you're not sick. So my doctor said, "You like music, go to the symphony." So I would go to the symphony and feel terribly guilty. And my doctor would say, "Yes, go with your son on a hockey trip to Finland and Sweden." And I went, "Really? It seems so, bad." And they go, "No, no, no, this is good for your mental health." And then you can't make this stuff up. So my flight back from Finland, Sweden lands in Toronto airport. And at the luggage carousel, I bump into the editor in chief of the Globe and Mail. And he looks at me like, "You're supposed to be sick." So in the end, the Globe fired me. And they said, "Oh, you don't need to go in. It's okay. We'll just send you the paperwork because we're firing you. Because you're sick and you don't come back to work, we say you're not sick. And you've been absent without a reason, so you're fired." And I said, "No, no, no, I'm coming in for it because I need the scene in my book. I'm writing a book about this. So I need to set the scene of how you're firing me." And then it took a long time to negotiate my firing because they wanted to impose a gag order, which brings me to my current work. But I did manage to win the right to tell my story. And I signed a memorandum of agreement, I don't know, 8 points, 6 points, in which they gave me 2 years' salary. And I was allowed to, they acknowledged I was not lying when I said I was sick. I wanted that. That had to be in it. And then the memorandum itself was confidential, right? So I write my book, and my publisher dumps me on the way to copy edit. I had signed a deal in the middle of my illness. And I said, "It's about the Globe." And they said, "Well, that's fine. We're bigger than the Globe." And then at the very end, the big honchos, the bosses at Doubleday Canada met me and said, "Oh, can you write this book? Can you rewrite it so the globe isn't in it? And I went, what? And I'm not better yet, but I'm not that stupid. And I go, I don't think you can write a book about workplace depression without the workplace. And then they said, well, we can't publish it. And so I said, well, all right. I came back a week later. I said, I read my contract. You have to pay me 3 out of the 4 payments. You don't have to pay me the fourth because you have every right not to publish. You wrote the contract. You don't have to publish. And so they said, okay, here's your money, sign the non-disclosure agreement. And I said, oh, well, clearly you haven't read my book very carefully because I don't do non-disclosures. The whole point is, as a journalist, you want to tell people what happened. And I said, the longer you hold my check, the better my epilogue. And so they coughed up my payment. And so the book was published out of the blue. So I published the book. It hits the Globe and Mail's bestseller list. I have to self-publish it, so I make 100% of the profits. That's great. I never made so much money on a book in my life. But then the Globe sues me. They sue me and they drag me back into arbitration and they say, you violated the memorandum of agreement, which says the memorandum was a secret, which I didn't really want to sign, but I thought, oh, it doesn't matter. I don't have to tell anybody how much money I got. But so I called it a big fat check in the book. And they said I violated it. And I had lawyers. The union wants to kill me. They're so angry at me. They teamed up with the Globe to really crush me. And I lost. I lost in court. My lawyers at first charged me a lot of money, and then they felt so bad for me, they worked pro bono. And they did their best. And I lost, and I had to repay the Globe the 2 years. And interestingly, they said they wrote about me. They assigned a reporter to write about me in their own newspaper. I mean, it was just so bizarre. Like I'm so nothing. And they wrote a story. I felt really bad for my colleague who had to write it. He tried his best to be, just matter of fact. And I noticed in one line they said, we're going to donate all the net proceeds to CAMH, which is the Canadian Association for Mental Health, right? I think that's what it stands for. And I checked, of course, because I'm a journalist. I checked with the head of CAMH and I said, so did you ever get like money from the Globe and Mail as a result? And he said, no. So, I'm not letting you ask me any questions, but I will round it up with my passion, which is non-disclosure agreements, because this is what insurers do, workplaces, all kinds of institutions. We generally think of them as used against victims of sexual assault. But in fact, I believe a huge amount of non-disclosure agreements are used against employees who have suffered in the workplace, trauma, all kinds of mental health problems. And they fight you and they fight you and they fight you. And then they shut you up. They behave so badly because they know that no one will ever know. You will not be able to tell any of your colleagues what happened because they're going to wrap it all up in a bow called an NDA. And that has been happening now for decades. And that's what I'm passionate about. That's what I am active in. And when people contact me for advice, I am very happy to talk to them and give them advice based on my own experience of what you can do to fight for your rights in the workplace or any organization. And you don't have to be a victim of sexual assault to have a big, powerful company come after you with an NDA. So I think I should let you have a good question.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Jen. It sounds like I'm listening to some kind of movie script as you're talking, because to me, this is absolutely incomprehensible how you were being treated for having mental health challenges, which is obviously a very real thing, and having that not being recognized and that actually ending up getting fired for that. Absolutely. I can't even believe that was happening. And I just want to let our listeners know that your book is called out of the blue, a memoir of workplace depression, recovery, redemption, and yes, happiness. Just so we have the title there. So if you're interested in reading about what Jen has been speaking about, that is the book to pick up. And is this a thing that happens very regularly? Because you said that obviously we don't know about it if someone has to sign an NDA, but in your experience, is this something that happens a lot?
Yes, I think it happens a lot because I hear from people everywhere, people who do go after contractors or real estate developers for faulty buildings. They won't get compensation unless they sign an NDA. And it's so widespread and everybody automatically slaps it on everything. And one of the things that really shocked me was in my last year of teaching journalism at St. Thomas University in Fredericton, New Brunswick. One of my journalism students, wanted to write about sexual assault. And every year, of course, students want to write this. There's nothing new. But then she found out, I said, well, find a new angle. And she eventually said, well, there's just something going on in the English department. And I said, well, find out. And then she found out that there was a professor who was accused of sexually harassing some drama students. He was a drama professor. And he was on a leave while they were investigating. But this is what was fascinating is that every student in the English department who knew about it was asked to sign a non-disclosure. So they couldn't talk to my student journalist. And I told her, this is what's interesting is if there's no penalty written into the NDA, you can break it. I know this much now. I know all kinds of legal things. So don't be afraid. If there's no penalty, there's no enforcement. But these poor students didn't know. And I tried to tell my student, just get them to talk, to find out what's happening. Don't use their names. Once you know the whole story, go back and say, look, I already know the whole story. Can you use your name? Can one of you use your names? And she didn't have the courage. She said, what if I lose my scholarship? I said, well, that would be a front page story in the Globe and Mail. And she said, well, what if I lose my student visa? Oh, I said, that will be a front page story in the New York Times. But she was too afraid. I said, I will hold your hand the whole way. She was still too afraid. So that's the ripple effect of NDAs. It's not just the problem for the mental health, it's for everything. And who knows if those kids in the English department were having a mental health problem about the sexual harassment by a professor, but they can't even talk about it. And many, many good people feel that they can't even talk to their spouse about it, their doctor, they can't talk to the police, because they just believe in the power of authority. When they tell you can't talk, they go, okay, I can't talk. It's so damaging to people's mental health not to be able to speak freely. And as a former correspondent in China, there's a mental health toll to not having freedom of thought and freedom of speech. Never mind what it's about. There's definitely a mental health toll. And in China, I remember seeing people so stressed out because they weren't free. So especially the men, they would cross their legs and their leg would jiggle, right? They had really intense cases of jiggly legs, which you see here sometimes, especially with men. But in China, it was very widespread. And to me, that's a signal of the mental health impact of the loss of your freedom of speech and your freedom of thought. And, it compounds the mental illness aspect.
Yeah, you and I talked a little bit before we started recording, and you shared that being able to talk about what is happening and sharing that journey is part of the healing process. So in effect, we're cutting off that healing process if we can't share and we can't talk about it and we actually can't move through what happened to come out the other end. So it takes away a lot of the power of the people who are struggling with their mental health. Did you also feel that in your own journey, you were just not being taken seriously? I mean, some of the things you told me that happened with the insurance company, I cannot even believe that is still happening today. And then that was happening back then. But Did you feel like your employer just didn't even take it seriously of what was happening to you?
Definitely. I felt, well, they were behaving in a very two-faced way because, and I do believe it's corporate that made them act like this, an order from the corporate owners. Because in terms of, it violated every journalistic principle to do this to one of your reporters, to not defend them, and then to trash them, and no plagiarism, no error, no corrections were necessary. And it was done with a full collaboration of the editors, it was fully edited. So that was kind of weird. But at the same time, they were giving lip service to mental health. It was so weird. Like, I think the week they fired me, they had this whole series on mental health in the workplace. So it's this hypocrisy in corporate business that they will pay lip service to it. And we saw this with Bell Let's Talk. They have this huge campaign. I think it finally bit the dust because people were laughing at it. I think maybe year 10, the hypocrisy of saying, Bell, let's talk. And then they would fire like 20% of their journalists because they still own media companies. They would fire them right away. And it was, I think, eventually the PR people said, this is actually not helping. So maybe we'll just ditch this campaign because they looked ridiculous. And in fact, it was Bell that wouldn't let me talk. So I at first I didn't really jump in because it's taken a long time to recover. But now I just jump in and I go, oh yeah, Bill, let's talk. You and let me talk. I just needle them every year and I have a good time. And I think they stopped doing it this year. I don't know. But corporations are hypocritical. They want to look, it's like in environmental terms, we call it greenwashing. I don't know what we should call it in mental health, maybe blue washing, right? Because if blue is depression, maybe they blue wash and they want to look like they're really nice, but they treat their employees really badly. And it's my feeling that if they would do the right thing by employees, they would save a lot of money. Because if you treat people with mental illness properly, you shorten the mental illness. If you treat them badly, you prolong it. So it'd be like treating someone with a broken leg. You don't believe in broken legs, so you keep breaking their leg all over again. Well, how long do you think it's going to take them to be able to get back to work and walk again if you keep breaking their leg? So I think they have been enabled and assisted by the pervasive social prejudice against mental illness because people are embarrassed to talk about it. Corporations can then be complete hypocrites.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you coined a new term, blue washing. I like that. I think that's very fitting.
I'm going to write it down.
Well, yeah, write that down and use that in your next book. That is a good term for that. But it is exactly that. People are made to feel like they're just not believed. There's nothing wrong with them. They just need to get on with it. And when it comes to the point of where they just can't hide it any longer or can't go on with it, yeah, then they get fired or they get told you can't talk about it. Yeah, you can't share. Absolutely.
It's very ancient, that attitude. It was one of the 7 deadly sins, and it was called sloth because you couldn't get out of bed. So we have a very ancient root to the sin of mental illness, that it's something bad that the person who has it is doing, that you should feel guilty because you're a bad person because you have sloth and you're not getting out of bed. And that's where the workplace attitude, that's the ancient roots of the workplace attitude, like get back to work. You've been off 6 weeks, get back to work. And we don't care how many sick notes you have because we don't really believe this is an actual thing. We think you're faking it. That's the origin of it. And the one way to fight it is to talk about it. And I know my psychiatrist, who helped me so much when I was sick, he told me that the research into the brain is so primitive compared to research into the heart or the kidneys, because for centuries, the church, I guess he was talking about the Catholic Church, reserved the right of the spirit, which was the brain, for itself. They said, okay, doctors, you can deal with the body, but we are in charge of the spirit. And so that's why mental health research is so far behind all other research and why we don't know so much.
I really do hope that people will come forward and talk about their own stories and share those to start breaking some of that power that is being held over them and give them that chance for freedom and for healing also in their own lives. Now, do you have any last words of advice or words of wisdom that you could leave our listeners with if they are experiencing a similar situation, if they are in a workplace that is not taking them seriously or is giving them a very hard time, or they are maybe in danger of getting fired over their mental health situation? Anything that you can leave them with?
One of the things that I advise people who contact me, and they contact me from all walks of life, is to vaporize the possibility of an NDA, a non-disclosure. And how do you do that? It's even though they tell you not to talk, and even though under Canadian law, an employer can order you not to talk, you can talk. You live in a democracy. You can talk. So, what I advise you to do if you're caught in a workplace situation and they said, don't talk, just talk and put it on your Facebook page or your social media. And why would I tell you to do that? Well, there's several reasons. One is you detoxify the stigma of mental health by talking about it openly. But more important, you have now neutralized the weapon that the institution is going to use against you in the end when they finally give you your settlement. They're going to attach it and make a non-disclosure one of the conditions of signing. If you talk about it now before you get to the negotiation table, you will neutralize that weapon. You will not have to sign an NDA because you've already told everybody about it. So I highly recommend that you start tweeting about it, writing on Facebook, Instagram, whatever you want, a blog, just publish. Publish it now. And maybe they'll be mad at you, but as I tell all my friends, get in line. You're mad at me, so is everybody else, no problem. Just do it now. Don't be afraid. You can take a baby step. You can tell one thing, and then when you feel a little braver in a week, you can put on more. The main thing is you publish. They can't do anything to you because you're writing about yourself. You cannot get sued for this. So that's my piece of advice.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And I think this will gain even more importance because we already know that the incidence of mental illness and mental health challenges are increasing every year. So there are more and more individuals who will find themselves in these situations and experiencing them for themselves. So thank you so much for sharing that. And this has been another incredible episode, and I really hope our listeners have enjoyed our conversation today as much as I have. It has been fantastic listening to you today and having you share your story and your advice in this episode. Thank you so much for taking the time to coming on and doing that, Jen. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Petra, for having me on, and good luck to you and your project. This is a great podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for your kind words. And of course, we will be sharing the information about how to contact you and your books and all of that in the show notes so that our listeners can find out where they can buy that and how they can get in touch with you in case they would like to talk about a situation that they're in themselves and take advantage of what you have shared on this podcast today. So thank you so much again, Jan, and take really great care of yourself.
Same to you.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Journey podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Journey on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejourney.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.